What's good, y'all? You already know what it is, baby. This is T Paris, aka the Young Marvin Gaye. This rap shit, most original, most creative, most in tune with the times, and I'm sort of like your inspiration. And this is P's Perspective, the recap. Let's not waste no time. Let's get right into it. Now, y'all know, like we always do at this time, I'm gonna ask that you please hit that like button. I want to ask that you please hit the subscribe and the comments. Y'all know how we greatly appreciate those. I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now, I'm very excited about this episode, man. I thought this was a deep topic. I felt like the comments and responses were very in-depth, very insightful. I hope you'll have as much fun discussing this topic as I did, man, because this really, touched into some of the things that I'm passionate about. Without further ado, man, let's get into it, man. This week's topic discussion was betrayal and trauma. We spoke about how betrayal could lead to some forms of trauma. We touched on how sometimes people would tell you, just get over your traumas, stop allowing those things to come back and stifle your growth. We touched on Nas and Nas's new album, man. Shout out to Nas, man. The album made me think about some of the things that we discussing here. And, it started off with a quote that Nas made. And I shared the quote with Nas expressing how we got to stop holding on to past traumas because they stop us from growing. And I felt like I disagreed with that statement because I feel like when you talk about trauma, you're talking about something that's a lot more deeper than just song lyrics. So let's get into some of these questions. Let's get into the heart to heart. And let's just see how everybody felt about what we had to say about betrayal and trauma. All right, so let's first start with the definitions, man. We said betrayal is a violation of one's trust and one's confidence. We said trauma was a disturbing incident that may have taken place that can affect you for periods of time, right? We also spoke about there being different types of trauma. So you got acute trauma, which is one isolated incident that may have taken place. You got chronic trauma, which is something that is taking place and you may be seeking therapy for it, but you have to continue to relive this situation over. And then we also spoke about complex traumas, which are traumas that we experience, but as we continue to grow, we experience a similar trauma over and over and over again. All right, so with these different forms of trauma, let's also keep in mind that trauma is something that we may all experience, but every trauma is not necessarily the same. Some are a little bit more in depth and a little bit more impactful than others. But without further ado, let's get into some of these questions and some of these responses. So we had 3 questions. Our first question was, why do we feel that some traumas are more important than others? Our second question is, how do you feel if you poured your heart out to someone and they said, get over it? And the third question is, what are some of your thoughts on counseling and therapy? Now, our first comment came from Deidre Matthews. She said, betrayal in a relationship is deep. A man can have a woman thinking, oh, girl, you the one I want to grow old with. Go out and buy the ring, propose, set a date, and a couple months before the big day, oh, let's discuss financial stuff. Nah, boo, you ass backwards. You talk before you buy the ring. That was, her insight about betrayal. Now, as far as trauma, she went on to say, losing a child at any age is hard. With Kanye, he was and is still screaming out for help. And he isn't receiving the proper help, in my opinion. He is a very intelligent man. With all that money he has, it can't bring his mom back, nor can it fix the trauma. He needs a time out to reflect. And naturally, he will never be the same, but he needs to find some peace. I appreciate your response. I think it was very detailed, and I appreciate the detail in your response. Toast to the town. Peace. Our next comment comes from Robert English. He said, mental health is rampant in the black neighborhoods and is frowned upon when one seeks help. Counseling is needed to help you navigate whatever traumatic situations you're going through, be it rejection or in a relationship, witnessing a killing, a robbery, someone you know passed away violently, even slavery, which started hundreds of years ago, that were black people still suffering from. The list is endless. Everyone is going through something, but many of our people don't know how to deal with these problems that they're facing, which only perpetuates the issue at hand. So that person you confide in tells you to get over it. It's also dealing with issues that they've never got help for. And that's what someone told me. And that's what someone told them, which is a problem in itself. That was a lot that you said right there, Mr. English. I appreciate that. That's my OG, man, Jetus. And he had a lot of valuable points in there, man. One that I want to point out is what he said, So that person you confide in tells you to get over it. When he's speaking about sometimes people haven't experienced that trauma that you experienced. And I just want to point out real quick, it's important that if you haven't experienced something that somebody has gone through, I got a hard time thinking that you got the answers about how to get through it. Now, this is something we touched on a while ago, is how people who haven't accomplished certain goals want to tell you can't do it. How you gonna tell somebody to get over something you never been through, man? Appreciate your honesty and your insight, man. Toast to the town. Our next comment comes from Brittany Cross. She said, trauma is trauma, and one does not override the other. But I do feel like people overuse the word and at times try to justify shit because of what they went through. Question 2. He said, a lot of people lack empathy, and many have suppressed traumas themselves, and more often than not, they push them to the side so they can only tell the next person to get over it. Although I think trauma is hard to get over, we just learn to better manage them. And question 3, she said, counseling and therapy is around for a reason. Talking to family and friends doesn't always help trauma. Sometimes it makes it worse. Talk to someone who is equipped with helping and manage and sort out what you've been through. And to add, I also think that many of us sometimes hold trauma like so close that we cripple our growth. We have to eventually learn not to let them dictate our lives. They rob us of our joys we deserve. They keep us from truly bonding, and they keep us bound. That is why forgiveness is important, because it sets us free from those experiences that truly hurt us. Now, that was a deep comment, and I appreciate the comment. It was a lot to unpack in that comment, but one thing that I want to point out is I don't think that trauma is trauma. You know what I'm saying? Of course, we all experience trauma, and you went on to say that one doesn't override the other. But I would like to think that, some traumas affect people in some ways, and some affect people in different ways. The way I read that, when it said trauma is trauma, it kind of just, to me, kind of felt like it kind of diminished, the impact of some of it. Like I said, we got different levels of trauma. And so sometimes you can experience something that you probably will never get over. I got a hard time personally with people telling you when you're supposed to get over certain things. So I want to tell you I appreciate the comment. I appreciate the insight. Very deep and very powerful. Take toast to the town, and thank you. Okay. Our next comment comes from Trisha Hopkins. She said, why do you feel some traumas are more important than others? She said, if it's something that they or we can relate to, then we may have to be insensitive to the other person. Then we may have been insensitive to the other person's circumstances. Question number 2, how would you feel if you poured your heart out and someone said, get over it? They're not for me. I'll keep it moving. And question 3, what are your thoughts on counseling and therapy? She said, I think it's great. Sometimes we have feelings that we don't know how to handle or resolve, and we may need assistance from an unbiased person. I agree with that. Sometimes that unbiased person might be a therapist, somebody who don't know you well, but they going to pull that information from you. I appreciate your honesty, appreciate the insight. Toast to the town. Our next comment comes from Corey Hepburn. He said, I think, number 1, people are selfish and can't really do anything about that. 2, that's why I really don't confide in people, because people typically, in my personal experience, seem like they care. So when you walk away from a conversation, you get a feeling that they really don't care about the issue, and that's fine. People's issues are their issues. And personally, as an individual, your personal issues should come first. And you should first try to change them. And question number 3, I really don't think a counselor, a doctor, or psychologist can really help what you're going through in your mind. They can lead you to the water, but they can't force you to drink. In a sentence, I think it really does work for some people, and for other people it doesn't work. I appreciate your honesty and your insight, King. I want to share something with you that somebody shared with me that I felt was very powerful as it pertains to your quote, that you could lead a horse to water, but you can't force him to drink it. I think a lot of times we don't take the time to explain how important the water is. And so it don't stop just by leading the horse to the water. You have to explain the importance of drinking the water. And because many times we don't take the time to explain that importance, we brush it off like it's not necessary. I gotta say, I disagree with the counseling thing, man. I think counseling and therapy is very important, very important. But I want to tell you, thank you for your thoughts, thank you for your comments and your insight. Toast to the town. Our next comment comes from Terry Lopez. He said, I think some people can, and some people can only see out of their own lenses. So there's not much empathy when it comes to other people's issues. It's almost dismissive. Secondly, therapy is important, especially for our community. For far too long, we've been told that it goes And I mean, we've been told that what goes on inside the house stays in this house. Therapy can provide the tools to cope and conquer issues. Mental health is or almost as important as physical health. I totally agree with your comment, brother. I appreciate that, man. Toast to the town and thank you. Our next comment comes from Dying Breed Media. He said, thoroughly enjoyed this topic. Question number 1, because traumatic experience can lead to dangerous, self-destructive behaviors later on in life. Example, an abused child becoming an abuser. Good solid point. Question 2, I would be sad that my point of view was thrown to the wayside and not cared for. I could agree with that. And question 3, as a person who has gone through years of therapy, I highly recommend it, especially for black communities. Once I got over the therapy, it's crazy. Once I got over the therapy is crazy for people phase, I started to use sessions to take advantage, and it really helped. The most important reasons I recommend it is to keep victims from responding to their trauma in self-destructive ways, and to give offenders a platform to start changing their behavior. Another great session, P100. I just want to say thank you for that, man. Very, very insightful response. One of my very, very consistent supporters. And I just want to tell you thank you for that, man. I really appreciate it. Toast to the town, brother. Our next comment comes from Brian Brown. He said, peace, King. Dope topic, TP. Salute the Nas. It's always a pleasure to find someone who appreciates Nas' wisdom. Question 1, I really don't know why we as people feel some trauma is more important than others. Me, personally, I feel like all trauma is difficult and important because each person is different. Question 2, I can't front. I would be hurt if I poured my heart out to someone and they said, get over it. Question 3, I feel both counseling and therapy we all need in some shape or form. But in the urban community, we have no direction in the way that we should go when it comes to these type of roadblocks of life. So many of us, including myself, self-meditate. Just being real, T. 100 King. Toast to the town. Dope topic. And once again, I appreciate your word. Toast to the town, brother. I appreciate the support, man. Our next comment comes from Tamala Williams. She said, peace, TP. Another great topic. I think when we speak of betrayal and trauma, one of the most damaging things that we could do to one another is impose our ways of dealing with the two onto each other, which often leads to re-traumatizing and increased betrayal. We owe it to ourselves to heal, but also to allow each other space and time to do so, and understand that this process will look different to all of us. In answering the questions, question 1, I think trauma is considered more important than others. She said, I think some traumas are considered more important than others because people are not empathetic as they should be. And too often they measure an understanding on how something affected them rather than how it could be impacted by somebody else. Powerful. Question 2, it wasn't good hearing getting over, but the times I have heard it have often led me to approach the impacts of what traumatized me. Question 3, therapy is very important, and I think oftentimes it will work if one is ready to put in the work. There's a saying that you can't heal in the same place that made you sick, and I think that is so important. A person's response to your trauma is telling to your own healing and lack thereof. Very, very insightful, very powerful, and I appreciate that. Toast to the town. Peace. Our next comment comes from Biscuit 2710. She said, question 1 and 2. Most people can only sympathize or understand things they've experienced. Everyone isn't able to fully comprehend what someone else could have or could be going through. But on the flip side of that, if they overcame some similar situation, they may expect everyone to react to said situation or problem the same way they did. Therefore, you can either spend time over communicating your feelings to someone who may or may not get your point of view, or you can accept the fact that they will never fully understand or sympathize with you. At that point, you can continue a healing process without them. This is applicable to family, friends, companies, etc. Question 3, therapy works if you have the means or come into contact with the right therapist. Very powerful and very insightful. I appreciate your comments. Toast to the town. Wow, man. A lot of those comments I felt were very, very insightful. Almost felt like some of the people who commented may be people who have participated in therapy or maybe even therapists themselves, because I felt a lot of empathy from the responses. And I just want to say thank you for those. Now we're going to open up and have our little heart-to-heart. Now, I want to first point out that you would be surprised at how many people have grown up in dysfunctional and uninspiring households, right? it's a known fact that black marriage today is almost obsolete. And so if the black marriage is obsolete, then how are we keeping the dynamics of the family together? Oftentimes, if the relationship don't work, we separate and go in our own separate ways. And I don't think that we take into account how that creates and causes trauma, right? And that may also be a form of betrayal. We don't see it as such, but these kids didn't ask, to be brought into the world. They came because, you two people thought that you had something in common and you laid down and created this, this beautiful child. But if we look at black families and we know that we're not perfect, and we know that, families are falling apart, then how can we, assume that all of us are not walking around with some form of trauma? You look at all the families across the world, the vast majority are growing up in single parent homes. Now, I know that it's going to be a lot of, single parent women here who feel like I did a great job. Maybe you did do a great job. I'm definitely not knocking that. However, just because you've done a great job in a single parent household, let's not make that the norm. Like, let's not make it seem like because you've done well that this is the way it should be. Every child deserves to have their mother and their father. And even though a lot of us don't want to acknowledge that, that form of disconnection right there is definitely traumatic, man. When you grow up in a household without your mom and your dad, it causes trauma. And sometimes it causes traumas that we oftentimes don't even tap into. But I'm gonna expand on that a little bit more. I want to point this out. When we think about trauma, we oftentimes think about the traditional ways that trauma has affected us, right? As it pertains to family. So number one is domestic violence, right? And somebody mentioned that in a comment. If you grew up in a household where you watch your dad beat on your mom, about 7 times out of 10, people gonna say it's likely that when you get into tumultuous situation with your partner, you're gonna use violence as a way, to defend yourself or, to protect your feelings. So that's one. Another one is, let's talk about drugs and alcoholism, right? If you grew up in a household where you got a parent that's an alcoholic or, a substance abuser, oftentimes we say that as you grow, that's something that might be, instrumental to you. You might also have an issue with alcoholism or have an issue with substance abuse. But what about these traumas that we don't address, right? And I'm gonna give you a couple examples. So let's talk about neglect, right? You got the mother who worked 2 jobs. For whatever reason, she stopped going to school, but she got to take care of these kids. So she busting her ass working 2 jobs. She got a son. And because she got a son, she feel like he could take care of himself. So she allowed her son to spend time at home. He playing video games and doing whatever he got to do. But this same young man don't interact with nobody socially. He's antisocial. He think that the video game is the real world. You know what I'm saying? Everything that he relates to is inside a video game, right? That's very traumatic because when he get into the real world, that video game won't exist the same. We don't want to talk about that, but that's a traumatic experience. Let me point out another one. What about that man that's raising 2 kids? You know what I'm saying? He got a great job though. He busting his ass. He paying all the bills and he spoiling them to death. Anything they want, he making sure they get it. Son and daughter. But on his days off, he always bringing different women in the house. And so the son and daughter grow up to believe that as long as you provide materialism, we good. So in all their relationships, as long as you buy nice things, they don't care about nothing else because that's where they came from. That's also a form of trauma. You know what I'm saying? It teaches promiscuity. And we don't want to talk about that. We don't want to talk about how seeing our mothers and fathers, date different people over and over and over again has caused trauma. And how it makes us feel like when I go into the world, I don't have to, tap into a relationship with one person. I could have 2 and 3 boyfriends or girlfriends at one time. Let me point out another one. How about that father that go to work? He busts his ass, construction worker, Con Ed worker. But he come home and he on top of his kids. Make sure you do your homework. Make sure you do them chores. Make sure you in the house at this time. Like everything is about what he want, what he think, what he feel. Totalitarian. right? And now when these kids grow up, they the same way. Everything is the way that I say it. And when they get angry and they get frustrated, they all up in your face. And they very, very, very often are not able to show empathy to anything because they had a drill sergeant for a father. You know, oftentimes we don't talk about these types of traumas. These are the type of things that affect our young adults, that they go off into the world and just hover over and keep that inside. And then when they become adults and they put them same energies onto their children, you see the kids in school, showing you little signs of promiscuity, showing you signs of they being neglected, showing signs of they being abused physically. And the reason why you're able to identify these things is because you too can remember going through some of these things. All of this stuff that I'm talking about is universal. Everybody could tap into this. You don't understand what I'm saying? We just don't want to talk about these things. I want to point out something else, man. Behind the scenes on this episode, I got so many texts and phone calls. Some people mad, some people emotional, some people very happy. You doing your thing. And I point that out to say this, man. Trauma is so impactful that oftentimes we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about what we're going through. I mean, go back and read some of the responses. Some people got very personal, didn't even answer the questions. They just talked about how they felt about trauma. Now, for those, who feel like trauma is just trauma, because I disagree with that. That's like, saying to somebody sex abuse is sex abuse. He might have touched that little boy on his butt. But we know in the grand scheme of things in this world, the man smacked the little boy on the butt. They're going to say, oh, nah, he was just congratulating him. Shorty did something good. That's how men show love. We see that in sports all the time. But then you turn around and you do that same little thing to a girl and we raising high hell water. We got to stop making it seem like it's okay to be selective in things, man. Trauma is not trauma, man. It affects everybody in different ways, but I think everybody should be able to tap into whatever it is that they dealing with. Stop using blanket statements to make everybody feel like, yeah, we understand what you're going through. Everybody deal with trauma. We understand. Nah, that's not cool, man. That's not cool at all. When you dealing with your little issues, you don't want nobody to push your joint aside and make it seem like, yo, kids get in trouble. That's what they do, man. They just being kids, right? So let's stop doing that when we talking about touchy situations such as trauma. I personally love this topic right here because I'm somebody who deal with trauma all the time, man. No secret. I talk about, every once in a while I might tap into it. I talk about what it was like growing up without my mom, and oftentimes women telling me they think that I hate women. You know what I'm saying? But if you're a woman that ever dealt with me on that level, I love y'all to death, man. I love y'all like cook food. But like I always say, I'm not for the nonsense, man. I'm not going to bite my tongue about things that I feel passionate about. And one thing that I feel very passionate about is, as it pertains to people of color, and oftentimes men, we always want to subdue our feelings and our thought process about things. I'm not with that, man. I feel in order for us to grow and to get back to the place of being kings and queens, it's about standing on things, man. And when I say stand on things, if it bothers you, in that moment, we need to address it, man. We need to address it. It's time to stop, throwing Band-Aids on things that we feel gonna heal just because nobody, want to discuss it. If you feel like the people that's in your circle don't want to sit down and show you empathy, we got to start looking into counseling and therapy, man. As people of color, I think it's important, man. We've endured so much pain and heartbreak over the years, and not just within the family. I'm talking about within the world, man. Dating all the way back to slavery, you know what I'm saying? Talk about the different type of forms of discrimination and racism that we deal with on a daily basis, you know what I'm saying? Paying attention to police murdering black men and black women. That's traumatic, man. That's traumatic. And if the only time we're going to talk about it is on social media, then we're not going to heal. We're not going to grow. Let me leave y'all with this, man. I feel it's time that we start normalizing things like therapy, normalizing things like healing, normalizing things like sitting down, having these touchy conversations, man. It's T. Paris, man. I love having these dialogues, man, but even more important than the dialogues, man, is the safe space, man. We need to start creating these safe spaces so that people can have the dialogues. Sometimes we do it in passing. Sometimes we do it right here in this forum. But we need to open up more safe spaces so people can have these dialogues. Like I said, a lot of people hit me up behind the scenes and they wanted to talk about something that was going on that was very touchy with them. This is T Paris, man. I love y'all. I love what we doing here. Y'all know what it is, man. Most original, most creative, most in tune with the times, baby. And I'm sort of like your inspiration. This is the recap. Peace.